My name is Alan Arthur, representing the GTMA on this call. Thank you for joining us. And you over to Steve. We've invited BCR as our business partners to make a presentation on energy, given the prominent role this is having in decision making in manufacturing companies at this moment in time. Steve will be offering some useful suggestions on managing energy, also providing some commentary on the current challenges facing manufacturing companies in particular, and offering some suggestions and some useful help. I'd like to say here that the issues around energy represent a risk and an opportunity. In terms of the cost of energy and use of energy, of course, that is a business risk. However, with the switch over to renewables and the ever-present need to move to more sensible ways of using energy, that's prompting manufacturing opportunities, be they in nuclear, conventional energy, or in offshore wind and other forms of energy. So we recognise that the supply of these products is a steady business stream that will grow over the coming years. The GTMA are going to continue the work to identify opportunities in the nuclear supply chain and other energy supply chains for our members, and also provide intelligence on the sector. The next edition of our supply chain solutions, which will come out in March, will feature energy in its two guises, one on the energy usage side of things, and Steve will be asked to write a piece for that, and the other will be on the side of opportunities in manufacturing for the energy sector. So as I've said, we'll take some questions at the end. Please put them in the chat as we go along. Steve's colleague will record those and make sure that those are brought to his attention, and leave your microphones on mute. I will now pass you over to Steve for your presentation, Steve. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Alan, and thank you to the GTMA for allowing me to sort of present today. My name's Steve Bolt. I'm director of a group called BCR Associates. We are a procurement and net zero consultancy business. We look after about 1,000 businesses, energy spend, energy management, energy efficiencies. And we've worked with the GTMA now for about 5 years, I think in total we've been members. What I'm going to do today really is give you hopefully some insight into where the energy market is, where we are currently, walk through the government scheme and what that would mean to your business, how it would impact on your business if you're in the process of or just recently entered into an energy contract. Give some insight to the future, where we see energy prices going and why, and then really give you some practical steps in terms of things you can do on site to look to mitigate energy consumption. I think one of the biggest challenges, I think, for all businesses at the moment is we've seen a pretty horrific market in terms of energy increases over the last, since August of last year. Now, this originally started as we came out of the lockdown in August. China decided at that stage to basically buy all the gas shipments that were available during the month of August. That sort of sent the world into a little bit of a tailspin in terms of where the energy market grew and the vulnerability of supply of energy, in particular gas. We then saw a very difficult trading period during August, September, October, which we then thought was coming to an end as we entered into the winter months, albeit that winter demand is always higher. We didn't see that the prices would stay as they were. Then, unfortunately, the Ukraine conflict then came into play, and that has now meant that really we are in a very, very volatile space in terms of where the energy market is. So that really then sort of gives you a background of really the economic areas of where energy has sort of got to at this stage. What I'm going to do in terms of the actual webinar is cover the energy bill relief scheme. What is the government doing to support business at this stage? I'm going to look at why net zero, what is the challenge to the world and why we're moving down this particular path. I'm going to look at the key areas you should be considering from a business point of view. I think it's important that energy is regarded as a strategic asset. For a lot of businesses, it's one of their biggest spends outside that of staff. So again, it's really important if it's a strategic spend for you, you understand what that looks like in terms of what you're committing to in terms of spend business going forward. I'm going to then look at the case for renewables, what you can actually do on site and how that might help. I'm going to give you our approach to what we do and how we can help. And more importantly, at the end, we will offer any member of the GTMA a free energy survey of their site. And it's really important to understand how your site uses energy, because that's the first place you start to reduce consumption, reduce emissions, and save money. It really is no more complicated than that. So first slide really is trying to make head or tail of the government's energy bill relief scheme. Now, where we got to with this was that clearly the domestic market works very differently to that of the business world. In the domestic market, we're all sort of going up at the same time. There's a cap, and we're all moving up together. So when the increases are coming in, we're all having the same increases at the same time. Now, the government has put various support mechanisms into that for the more vulnerable in terms of winter relief, age relief, and a one-off payment to everybody of £400, which actually I saw for the first time on my energy bill this month. There was a £66 and 66p rebate, which over the 6 months will equal my £400. So I actually saw that actually coming through with the £400. Now, the government didn't means test it, and the reason they didn't do that was the fact that it would simply take too long to look back at the last time a company had put their accounts in, or an individual had gone through the PAYE system to see what income they have. So it's just quicker to pay it out to everybody. So that's what they've sort of done in the domestic space. They have sort of pulled back on the scheme in the last few weeks. So the scheme was going to run for 2 years. It's only going to run for 6 months with a review at the end of 6 months. So at the end of March, it will be reviewed. And I'll cover a little bit why I think they've done that as I come through this, because looking at the long-term energy costs, there is a little bit of softening in the market in terms of what the prices may look like a year down the line, 18 months down the line. So I can see why their thought process is as to why they're thinking that way, that 6 months is at their minimum. That's where we're starting. If I then turn to the business world, which is where we all sit in, we have a scheme that, again, was only going to be for 6 months. Now, what the government has said is it would look to support certain industries, but was a little bit vague what it meant by that after the 6 month period. So it did say, it mentioned care, it mentioned hospitality. I suspect they've got to look at high-end users, but there isn't no ceiling to that at this stage. So hopefully between now and Christmas, because they said within 3 months they'd have out what we're going next, we'll have an indication of which businesses are being supported. And I know that industries like myself will be lobbying government to try and get this industry, your members included along with everybody else. Everybody does. It's important actually that we all get behind the associations and actually lobby our MPs and our members of parliament so we get at least considered when we come past April. Now, how's this scheme actually going to work? And I think there's been a little bit of confusion in terms of how the energy bill relief scheme is actually going to work for us in terms of business. In the domestic space, they've set the rate at 34p for electricity. In the business market, they're only giving a discount on what we call the wholesale element of an energy contract. Just so everybody on this call is aware of how an energy contract is constructed, effectively you have two types of meter. You have what they call an O3 meter, which is aimed at what we call the SME market, there's lower end users. And then you have a half hourly meter with an OO prefix aimed at the higher end users in the market. It's called a half hourly meter because it reports to the grid every half hour. So 48 times a day, it gives a reading to the grid to tell you how much energy is being used on site. Now, if you have either a smart meter or you have a half hourly meter, you should be able to get your energy data from your current supplier. That will give you an indication of how you're using energy and at what time of the day you're using most of your energy. Really useful. If you haven't got that, please request that from your supplier, because that will give you an idea of what you're actually using. Now, in putting together an energy contract, as I said, there are two types of meter. There's a myriad of different types of contract, which makes it quite confusing, I think, for the business world. So most businesses we deal with have what they call a fully fixed contract. That's a contract where you get a rate, and you may have a day rate, and you also have a night rate, maybe, in your setup. But that's actually a rate adding all of the elements together. What it doesn't do, and what won't happen in this scheme, is if that rate was 40p, for argument's sake, it wouldn't drop you down to 21.1p. 21.1p is only for the wholesale commodity element. Added to that will be the government taxes. Currently, there are 27 taxes in an energy contract, and it varies depending on where you are in the country. because part of that is transportation, taking energy around the grid. So that adds to it. We reckon that's going to be roughly around about 10 to 12p. Then there is what they call a KVA charge. If you're a high-end user, you pay for volume on top. You get a payment, you have to have a volume on top. And then there's standing charges that you have to pay as well. And those of you who've recently taken out an energy contract will know the standing charges have gone up quite significantly in the last 12 months. So in putting that together, we think, and this is, and we do this for a living, bear in mind, we think your energy price will be between 34 and 40 pence per kilowatt. That's what the discount will get you down to. It won't be 21.1p. Similarly for gas, it'll be about 12 to 15p. So there's a lot of confusion as to this market, and often clients say to us, well, I'm only going to pay 21.1p going forward. The answer is no, you won't. You'll pay the government taxes, KVA and standing charges on top. So it's really important to understand that. So if you're budgeting, you'll get an indication what that looks like when your October bill comes through in November, because that will give you an idea of the rate that your particular supplier is charging you, because they should be charging you less the discount. Because the way that the government has set this up is that you as an end user will pay the bill net with the cap applied, and the supplier will then claim the balance off the state. So that's how they've sort of set the scheme up to run. The question will be, how ready the suppliers are to action that? Bear in mind, they have no computer system built to do this. So there will be some challenges, I think, from the suppliers to be able to put this in place quickly. But so I think we will get quite a few calls when the first bill comes through. People say, well, I'm paying more than 21p, and you will be. But I think that's the bit that's been a little bit lost in the translation. To give you an example, I said earlier, in the domestic space, we're at 34 pence. So broadly speaking, domestic is slightly more expensive than commercial energy, usually by about a couple of pennies. That's usually where it sits. If I then move on to one of the key factors, and if you look at the government website, and I'll send a link afterwards, and when we send the presentation, a link to the government website about the Energy Bill Relief Scheme, it's really, really important that you're in a contract. If you're out of contract, a lot of clients stayed out of contract leading up to this because they were worried about committing to a long-term spend, long-term commitment in a unit rate. If you're not in contract, the government will only apply 34.5 pence maximum discount for electricity. So as an example, the current rates as we go through the winter will move from about 40 pence through to 80 pence wholesale. If you're paying 80 pence, take 34.5p off, you're nowhere near the 21.1p. So you will not get maximum discount if you're not in a contract. So it's really important. If you're sitting outside saying, I'm going to stay in deemed rates, I'm not going to get a contract with supplier, please get in a contract. You will save money. It is no more complicated than that. There is no downside to being in a contract, and a lot of suppliers are offering contracts for just the period to the end of March. So again, you can do a 5-month contract, a 6-month contract, but to the end of March, and then they'll look at it again after March. But it really is important. And the example I give here is if the deemed rate was 60 pence, take the 34.5p off, the net rate is 25.5, you could get in a contract 21.1. We're paying an extra 4.4 pence per unit during that period if you're not in a contract. So that's one of the things that's been overlooked in the scheme. Not everybody's going to be treated the same. It's based around the contract you have. And just to sort of put things in perspective, this just shows you how a contract is put together. It's the challenge that the government's always had in the energy space is there is a traded commodity, which is electricity gas. It's based around the gas market. And the energy prices tend to follow the gas market up and down. The issue that we have within the industry and what we wanted the government to break was the relationship between the gas price and the creation of the electricity price. Because only about 30% of gas is used in creating an electricity unit. And I'll show in a second with a slide exactly what a typical generation looks like. Because if you think about it, there's been a lot of talk in the press over the last few months about windfall taxes, especially aimed at BP and Shell. What they forget to say is that all the renewable companies have also made a lot of money. There are wind farms making 600-700% profits because they're able to sell to the grid at a given rate way above what they're actually generating or making the electricity. So the profits are huge right across any generator at this stage, with the exception of gas, because gas you're paying the price that we get from Russia and Norway and other areas. So it's really important to understand how things are actually put together. And this just shows you some of the government taxes that actually sit in an energy contract. So going back to September 2019, the wholesale cost was about 38% of the unit price. Unit prices at the time were about 14, 15p for electricity. The balance were government taxes. What we've seen with the demand in the market and 500, 600, 700% increases in the wholesale price is the wholesale price is now 85% plus of the unit price. The government taxes have been squeezed. They're roughly the same cost. They've just been squeezed because the wholesale price has seen a huge jump in costs. The bill relief scheme is trying its best to try and deal with this by saying we'll take you back, we'll take some of the wholesale costs away. But it is important that you have the right contract. So that's what I would stress. If anybody wants any advice on what type of contract they should have, then speak to your broker that you currently use, speak to Alan or myself, and we'll give you some insight into what you can do going forward. But again, it's really important that you maximize the benefit that's on offer from the scheme. To give you an example of what the grid looks like, this was yesterday.
Yes.
So at 2:55 yesterday afternoon, it was a pretty murky day down in Devon, I have to say, or it was like elsewhere in the world. You can see that 44.7% of the generation at 5 to 3 was actually fossil fuel. So of which all of it was gas. So we're still very dependent on gas to drive our energy generation, electricity generation at this moment in time. 53% was the renewables during the day. It was very windy, which was good. We got 41%. We had 11% for solar, but clearly we get to 5 o'clock and solar doesn't really work during the winter in the northern hemisphere. So it has good take up during the day, but typically a solar unit sitting on a roof has about a 22% efficiency measure because it's dark for large parts of the day, and we move into winter periods. We have nuclear, 15%. Actually, interestingly, when Hinkley Point C comes online, that will be about 7% just in its own right. Hinkley Point B is only about 2%. So this is quite a significant increase in nuclear usage. And again, what I would say to anybody who's on the call, if ever you want a really good day out, go to Hinkley Point C. Actually, it's free to go. You have to book yourself in. EDF, who run it, they have a really, really good technology centre in a place called Cranston. And it shows you how nuclear power works, and they'll take you on a coach tour around the building site. It's absolutely fascinating. We took the whole of our team there a couple of weeks ago, and the scale of that site is just phenomenal. But it just shows you. And then the other thing we do, and this is the bit where I don't think, although the press has said there could be blackouts, this is the bit that really helps us as a business, something called interconnectors or importers and exporters. We trade energy between the countries listed below. We have cabling going underneath the various parts of the channel and the North Sea, and we are able to sell our excess energy over to Europe or draw excess energy back from Europe should we need it. So there is a bit of wriggle room left in the system, and on that day we were quite good actually. We were exporting nearly 15%, of which most of it went to France. As you can see, nearly 6%. So we sort of have a setup where that's what we currently have. As you can see there, at that time, it was costing us 32 pence per megawatt to actually make the electricity. The going rate currently is over 60p. That's the differential between what the price is that we're generating it for and what the price we're creating it for. So the difference is the bit really where the government needs to break the link between how gas electricity is put together. That would be an immediate drop in the electricity price overnight if they could break that. Because at the moment we need to pay double. We're actually charging double what we're actually paying for the cost of it being generated. And that means that going back to the generators are huge profits still. So that's just where we are at this moment in time. But it's quite an interesting slide. And down the bottom is the link. And you can look at that. It's updated about every 10 minutes. So you can actually see right at this moment, I could go on that link. It would tell me exactly what's generated right now. Looking outside, it's very windy again, so but not very sunny. So it wouldn't be too dissimilar, I would think. So if that's where we are in terms of the challenge we've got, the government have tried to put something in place to help us in the short term. If I now look at the 1, 2, 3 year energy sort of curve in terms of buying energy going forward, we get into a very sticky point around December, January, February. The generation costs drive up to in the mid-80s. So you can see that and that's due to demand really, and the fact we're entering the winter months. But when I get into spring, we're dropping down into the low 30s. Now, bear in mind that the underpin comes in at 21.1. So we're at in mid 30s. So it's about a 13p differential at the moment. As we get to the summer, it softens again and then kicks up again in the winter. But this time next year, currently, you can buy energy at about 40 pence. Currently, we're paying nearly 80. So it's halving again. And then the following year, we're back into around the 2022 element for that year. So it is a softening curve going further out. Now, what you can do if you're buying energy at this moment in time is actually buy over a longer term, because then they will then use the cheaper elements to soften the price at the front end. So yesterday, as an example, we were pricing a 2-year contract. It was coming out about 40 pence in the for about 42, 43p. So that's where we were sitting yesterday afternoon in the market for a 2-year contract. So we got the benefit of cheaper energy further out, offsetting the cost of dearer energy now. Now, the argument then is it's all about cash flow. What can you afford as a business in terms of what you're spending right at this moment in time? And the difficulty is if you can't afford to spend 80p on energy or 60p on energy, yes, you've got a cap for 6 months, but after that, the cap is no longer there. And then you've got to look at what that might look like from a cash flow point of view. So there are some advantages of buying longer because you'll water down some of the problems we're having right at this moment in time. Now, ahead of us, we've got net zero. And Alan, as he said right at the start, he's absolutely correct that one of the key factors are that if we embrace net zero and the journey we're all going to go on to try and get to a place where our businesses have a net zero impact on the economy, on the climate, that has lots of positive connotations to it in terms of, firstly, you will reduce emissions, you will reduce consumption, and you will save money. It is probably no more complicated than that in terms of those 3 things go hand in hand in terms of how it will benefit you. We have certain targets we're trying to get to. At the moment, there are 7,500 companies in the UK, those with more than 250 staff and certain turnover and certain balance sheet that have to comply to energy compliance with schemes such as Streamlined Energy Carbon Reporting, which we call SECRA, and Energy Savings Opportunity Scheme, ESOS. ESOS is driven by the Environment Agency on a 4-year rolling cycle of how carbon is used on site. SECRA is actually in your accounts and is an accounting process to show your CO2 output during a period. The difficulty I think businesses have at the moment, that's for the larger groups. If we're really going to tackle this going forward, the versions of this will trickle down to companies of 100 or 50 staff. This is coming our way sometime down the line. The challenge we've got, I think, as a business is that by 2050, we want to be at 100% net zero as a country. You could argue, and somebody has said this time and time again to me, the UK is one of the smaller groups in terms of us polluting the planet. We're probably in the top 10, but the top 4 are 85 of the pollutants in their own right. So Russia, India, China, USA, they're the 4 big polluters of the world. And we all need to get behind this. And this was part of the Paris Accord. And we have all signed up for that. Whether we'll get there, if we don't, there are some pretty nasty repercussions to the planet. We will see the ban of new petrol and diesel vehicles coming in 2030. That means that eventually the shift will be to an electric vehicle type solution for us all, both in terms of cars, but also in terms of trucks, lorries, and that behind that. And then we need the infrastructure to be able to deal with that. Because at the moment, we don't have that infrastructure. Alan and I were chatting earlier that one of the big issues we have is that if you live in rural England, trying to find a charging point can be a challenge. Trying to find a garage currently can be a challenge. So it is one of those things that we need to get the infrastructure better. The other thing to bear in mind also, if you put a lot of EV charging points on your building, every building in the UK has what they call a KVA allowance. That's how much voltage your building is allowed to use at any one time. If you infringe that, you go through that, that gets reported to the local DNO. The DNO is basically what was the old electricity board. In the Southwest, it's Western Power Distribution, as an example. In the home county, Scottish Southern Electric. Wales is Swalec or Scottish Southern Electric as well. So there are different boards around that. They reserve the right to go back to you as a business and say, you need to pay for upgrading the substation because you're infringing the allowance you've got on your building. So it's really important you understand what your building's allowance is and how near you are to that. I have a problem here with the local rugby club, who are clients of ours, and they're a Premiership rugby club. And on match day, when they put those floodlights on in the winter, and they've got to have them on because BT insists they're having them on, and they've just built a new stand, they are very, very close to their KVA allowance. They're within 2%. If they infringe that, there is a problem for them. And that's the same for any business. So it's really important you understand what your allowances are, what the site can do, and then how you future-proof it to make sure you don't trip an unexpected expense to the business. So that's really, really important. And I think the other thing that we're looking at is we're looking at all Britain's electricity will come from renewables by 2035. Including in that will be nuclear. That is regarded as part of the package that we will need to have to get energy security long term. I think the other thing that we saw on the previous slide was that a significant portion of our current energy consumption is gas, and we'll have to find an alternative to gas. Now, things like hydrogen are being looked at as an example. And for those of you who bought a new boiler in the last few years for your home, you will see a hydrogen conversion option actually in the boiler. I have one in mine. And it will use pipes in the same way. It's just we need to make it a bit safer and understand how we deal with this long term. But we are surrounded by water, so that is a positive. There's plenty of where hydrogen can come from. So they will be looking at alternative solutions for fuel as we go forward. But one of the best things you can do, if you can do it, is on-site generation. The less you become reliant on the grid, the more money you will save. So again, we're going to walk through what things you've got to consider from a business point of view going forward in terms of how your site may use energy. So I've got a couple of thought processes really here in terms of where you're at and what you might want to consider. One of the big things really is understanding how much money you have. What's the budget look like in terms of your current energy spend? I suspect for most businesses that's quite scary at this stage. There are a portion of clients who bought a year ago and still got another year or two to go and not actually seeing the current increases in the market because they're in fixed contracts. So this is where we differ from the domestic space, where we're all going up together. In the business world, it will vary depending on when you bought the contract. If you're not sure what your energy budget is, then again, just seek advice from the broker or the person that gave you the advice, because they will be able to show you what you used on a previous year and give you an idea of what that indication is. The other thing that we are seeing in the budgetary side, for those of you in the manufacturing process, I've seen a number of instances now where clients are being passed on a surcharge for gas or for electricity costs being added to a contract to pay for goods. So we're starting to see an ability where some clients are trying to pass costs on that they're now having to incur. So again, I think if you're writing a contract for a client going forward, make sure you protect yourself in your contract. You've got some wriggle room should anything unforeseen come into play, and they're able at least to pass costs on. Otherwise, you're bearing the brunt of the costs with a unit you've already agreed a price for. So we've seen a lot more of that type thing being put into new contracts to protect businesses. Depending on where you are in the country, there can be grants available if you're looking to do things on site. So for example, if you're in Derbyshire, there is an energy efficiency grant up to £20,000 to explore and implement energy saving mechanisms on site. So that's something that, again, grants often in the UK are regionalised depending on how the local councils are set up. They're not always a national piece. So again, it might be used to exploring locally what is available to you and what could be offset. One of the key things I think for any business is to make sure that you understand what your site is actually doing. Because again, everybody gets a monthly bill with a number of units used and a price next to it, which you have to pay by direct debit. But one of the things that bill won't do is break down what's actually happening when you leave tonight. So when you leave the site tonight at 5, 6, 7, 8 o'clock, whatever time you leave, what's still on and still costing you money? One of the key things in any business is to actually establish a baseline. The baseline is, what's my site doing when nothing is happening, when nobody's here? Then we can see, is everything shutting down properly? And then as the site opens up, what's opening up and when? So that's really important. The other thing to bear in mind also is whenever you're considering a plan of any description, think about your customer. Customers you have, customers you would like, what's their CSR policy? What are they looking to do? What are they affiliated to? Because again, that might help you in actually winning a contract. We're finding more and more in contract terms, comments around green renewable energy, around carbon footprinting. Do you understand what your site is doing? Are you completing ESOS? What are you part of in terms of different sort of carbon certifications? That is coming more and more into the business world. So again, just have a look at your key clients, have a look at what they're showing on their website, and just see if they have joined anything. So you're aware when you come up for your renewal of your contract, you're at least on the front foot into the way they are thinking. Really, really important, but also helps you shape your CSR policy. And that's really key. The other thing to bear in mind is you're not going to fix this overnight. This is a journey you're going to go on, which could take anything 2, 5, 10 years, depending on what you do and what your carbon footprint actually is. So it's really, really important that actually you start the journey somewhere. Important to engage the staff, get the buy-in from the people, the stakeholders, and have some targets of what you're going to set. Currently you're using X, what's that going to look like in 12 months' time? Can we make it to Y? And what we need to do that. And then just make sure really that legislation or verification, certification, if you need it, you have the right one that will help you secure business in your world. So for example, in the accident repair industry, they use something called PAS 260. PAS 260 is a verification tool that looks back on the year and says, during this year, this is what we've done for carbon on site. And then you can get a certificate, a verification, which then runs forward for the next 12 months. That's their world. I've seen the growth of things like B Corp. B Corp has come into play. There's about 4,500 members of B Corp throughout the world. Very much starts its sort of background in what I would call the HR and well-being and your supporting your colleagues at work, but then is morphed into a financial tool and a tool in the energy space. So it's that harmonization of how you operate, how you want to be perceived, and then how you're impacting on the planet. It's really important that you understand there's a lot of certification out there. It's making sure you choose the right one for your industry. And again, the other difficulty in this, because we've been ISO 9001 and 14001 for quite some years. Now we made a decision to step back from that to go to B Corp, because that will suit our world better going forward, because that's going more down the route that we need. ISO 9001 and 14001 tends to be in the manufacturing space. But as of yet, ISO have not come out with a net zero qualification piece. They're not there yet. It's on the agenda, but it isn't. They've got 14,000 on sustainability. They haven't got a net zero version of that. So again, just think about what you might need in terms of legislation verification, because that will help you build the plan in the right way so that you're actually focused on what you need to do from a business point of view to stay in, A, retain clients, but B, attract clients. And that's really important going forward. So you see this as a positive, is a way of actually helping you grow your business actually by embracing change. The difficulty, I suppose, in any business is that, where do you start? We've got a schematic here of I think I've put every renewable you can think of on that page, or tried to. But again, depending on your site and whether you own the site or you're renting the site will dictate a lot of things you can do. Interestingly, we are finding a real movement now from landlords to consider solar going on the roof on behalf of tenants. That's partly because there's a piece of legislation coming down the route for commercial landlords under the EPC's energy performance certification, where they have to get the building at C grade by 2025. If they don't, when the lease is due, they can't rent that building till it is at C grade. So again, if you're in premises and you've got a longer term lease on the premises, it is possible to get landlords. We've just done a piece of work for a business in Bury St Edmunds. We've put solar on the roof. The company's got 11 years left on their lease. The company paid for it outright. They will make their money back within about 3 to 4 years. It's in their interest to do it. The landlord was like pushing against an open door. Why wouldn't he do it? Makes it easier if they do leave in 11 years. His building becomes more appealing to the next tenant. So there's lots of things like that that are available in the market that may help people in terms of what you do on site. But the key with any site is, if you regard energy as a strategic asset, it's how is your site using energy? So we go right back to where I started. An energy audit carried out by your broker or who you're currently using in that space is an absolute must, because it's important that you understand how your site is using energy. And if you have machinery, you can actually put kit on machinery to compare two identical pieces of kit and see which one is producing best for you. We've done a piece of work in the printing trade where we put the company invested about £750,000 in an eco printer 18 months ago. I didn't really know whether it was any better than what they actually had. So we put kit on there, little clips, they clip on, they're portable clips. They go to a bridge, sends it to our platform, and we're able to monitor now what those two printers, when they run two jobs together, how well they're performing. Luckily for the company in question, the eco printer is actually using 25% of the energy the old printer is using. So it was a good investment. But it also means that if you only have one job, they know which printer to use because it will save the money, which means their profit margin is greater in terms of actually the end product for the client. And again, that will be the same in your world. When you look at your machinery, you may have on site 2 or 3 identical machines. It may be worth just grading them by putting kit on them and measuring them over a typical job they do to see how they're using electricity. And that will give you a better indication of which ones to use if you only have one in play at any one time. So it's things like that are really key in terms of actually how you actually run a factory of any description. And then you can look at what else you can do. And really, you know, it is a case of looking where the factory is, looking where the sun rises and sets, looking at what ground you have, and then really coming up with a plan of what can we do to get on-site generation for that particular site. I suppose the challenge when you try and pull all this together, it's really just looking at the risk element for you in terms of infrastructure and the impact on the infrastructure if you're adding things to site. There's an element of cost, and you have to think about what it might cost. Now, one of the things that is quite interesting in this space is if you have a certain size roof, you can lease your roof to a solar company. Now, again, we can give you an idea what that would look like, but it's something called a power purchase agreement, whereby the solar company puts solar on your roof and they maintain it. It's their piece of kit and you buy from them at an agreed price, which will be significantly lower than you buy from the grid. But there's no capital outlay. So again, solar doesn't have to cost money. It can, and two of the largest arrays in the UK, for those of you who know this, Derby, in Rolls-Royce Derby, they have a solar array on the roof there, about 4 to 5 football pitches in size. As has in Telford, Lyrico, with the stationery company, similar size roof. I've been on the roof at Telford. Both of those arrays are owned by the Guinness Trust. It didn't cost either business a penny to put that on the roof, and they're paying currently 6p rate. We'd die for that today, that rate. They're all paying 6p, but that was put on a few years ago. The beauty of not owning the solar array is that the maintenance sits with the solar company. Typically an inverter, that's the bit that converts the sun's rays into electricity, have an 8 to 10 year shelf life. And they're about £10,000 each to replace. So it may be worth considering leasing rather than buying outright. It really depends on what you can afford, what your balance sheet looks like, and whether you want to pay it at a capex or you just want to lease the roof. That's really a decision only you can make, knowing your business and where you're at. But you have that opportunity to look at that. And then the other thing to bear in mind is, if carbon emissions are important to your business, and some businesses are, they're looking at their carbon output, their scope 1, which is the direct carbon used on site, usually around gas and fuel. Scope 2 is indirect, that's your electricity. Scope 3 is everything else you do. If you have to understand your carbon emissions, there's a site we can send you a link to, which asks you 15 questions and give you an idea of what that would look like. You can also subscribe, if it's a prerequisite of your business, to a monthly piece that updates your carbon footprint monthly, which could be useful if you need it in terms of securing contracts. I'll give you an example of that. Tesco's, the piece of kit we use was approved by Tesco's for all its supply chain when it made all of its suppliers complete a carbon audit and look at its carbon footprint. So, a couple of our clients actually are suppliers of Tesco, so they've had to do this. To give you an idea of the case for renewables, this sort of sits in a very simple sort of piece. This is a client of ours, just to give you an idea of what, in monetary terms, what the impact of the changes have been in terms of the escalation of cost in the energy market. This particular client is using about 120,000 units. Their current spend is was 122,000. Then their projected spend is nearly 600,000. So they have to find a further £466,000 off their bottom line just to pay for energy. Now, energy isn't the only thing that's gone up either, because their raw materials and their goods and sort of also gone up. The supply chain has been difficult. So it's an impact, not on energy, it's an impact across a number of different areas. What we've done is we've looked at that particular site. We actually have put a solar project in place. We are playing it down the safe side. We think the solar project will put about 20% saving to them. They're looking at a power purchase agreement. It will cost them nothing to put it on play in site, but it will actually save them £117,000 a year. That's at the conservative end of what we think it will do. They're looking at LED project. They didn't have LEDs on site. That would save them a further £58,000. And then we have an energy management tool using AI technology, artificial technology, and that's looking at how a site operates and then compares a piece of kit with what the manufacturer says it should be doing. And then brought it back and said, well, actually, this machine is out of kilter with manufacturer specification. And it can break it right down to different light fittings around a building. And it's a really clever piece of kit that gives them an idea of what the site is actually doing. And on average, the figures are that we waste about 20% of the energy on site through various ways we work. So again, we believe this particular piece for them will save them about 15%. Renewables for them will save them 265,000 and over half the increase, with a very modest capital spend of no more than about £10,000. So that's the things that all of those are done on leasing agreements and various other bits. It's not done on outright purchasing. So it doesn't have to be expensive to deal with the renewable market. The other thing to bear in mind also is that if you're doing various things on site and you're looking at trying to understand how your energy works and you're trialing things that it doesn't quite work and you're using different research pieces to this, there are various tax allowances on site. So think about R&D from that element. Capital allowance, if you're putting solar is a capital allowance. If you're looking to make your roof safe because it was asbestos previously and changing it, land redemption comes in. But there are certain things you can claim back the state actually has in place to offset some of the costs. So it's really important you get some tax advice as well, not just on energy. Take a tax specialist into play. And this is just our process. So to give you an idea of how we approach it, we start with understanding. We need to understand what a site is doing. And as I said right at the very start of this, we will offer to every member here a free energy audit if that's what you want. And that will just give you an idea of how your site is using energy and where we believe you can start reducing consumption, reducing emissions and saving money. But it starts with that. We then look at, with our clients, we set a target. What do you want to do? Is it 10%, 50%? What do you want to reduce your energy consumption by? What controls are we going to put in place to make that work? Can we look at the settings you've got on site? I was with a client on Monday. For some reason, their business management system had their site running from 8 till 8. They close at 5 o'clock. 3 hours after they closed, the site is still, the heating system still go around the building. So make sure that you've aligned your building with your working practices. Yeah, that's really important. Prioritize what you can do. Look at your budgets. Look at the things that will help you in terms of where you're thinking. But more importantly, have a review process in place to make sure you continue to review what you're doing. That's the sort of thing. If you look at our website, you'll see all of this, and you can click on each of these. It will tell you how we can help, because we can get involved in all of these different areas. We have supply chain across everything you see there. One thing I'm going to bring to your attention is the one under energy efficiency, the very last one, called demand side response. If you're a high-end user, one of the things the government will offer you, if you can shut your factory down at a certain time, you can sell energy back to the grid. So if you're working shifts and you change your shift patterns, and maybe you finish at 4 o'clock on a Friday, the prime time for the grid is 4 till 7. That's what they call the red zone. That's where we domestics come home, put the kettle on, put the TV on, and put the oven on and start cooking. And we do it in our millions in the UK. If you can sell energy back during that time, you will make money by not having the factory open at that time. It may be worth just thinking about your shift patterns if you're a high-end user, and being able to sell energy back to the state. So those are the things that are out there. It's just like taking the right advice to see how can we actually mitigate some of the costs that might be out there in terms of spend. And with every client we deal with, and this is how this would work for the audit, we actually put together a no obligation proposal. That's what we do from a business point of view. We'll list out what we can do, how we think we can help you, and then it's up to you as an individual to take some advice or none of our advice. That's really your call at the end of it. But that's really us and how we operate as a business. Okay, any questions?
There's one here.
Right, and a question through, how do you define a high-end user? It's a very good question, David. Usually, if you have a half-hourly meter, and you're deemed a half-hourly meter, you're using more than what they call half a gig, there was 500,000 units and above, you'll be deemed as a high-end user by the state. There are people using 20, 30, 40 gig, which is 30 million units, but anything above half a million is usually where they would start to consider some demand side response or anything like that. They would usually start in that space. One of the key things, also another question I've had, is what are the key dates going forward in terms of the energy market? Well, clearly, for those of you who are benefiting from the Energy Business Relief Scheme, that scheme runs to the end of March. So during March sometime, you're going to have to think about a new contract if your contract is due to end up on the 31st of March. You and a lot of other groups will all be coming into the market at the same time. Unfortunately, when the market gets saturated, prices tend to go against the person buying. So you don't have to wait to February to buy. You can actually buy much earlier. You can actually come a bit forward out of that process. So April will be a key date. The other key date in the market is October. And October is a key date because that's when the energy market decentralized, when it no longer became owned by the state. So a lot of the big players who've been in business for many, many years all buy their energy in October. So we find that's quite a difficult time to actually buy. It's usually better to buy in July, August, because usually in July and August, the market's a bit softer because you're in the summer months. So the way the market sees the longer term is often a bit softer. So we usually suggest you buy if you can in July or August. The other thing I would also suggest is that if you are considering or having to buy energy and you're looking at trying to control the price, if you can, in this, where we've got this difficult trading period, the next 12 months, if you can add in as many summer months as possible, you can write a contract for 15 months, 16 months, 17 months. It doesn't have to be 12, 24, 36. If that extra 4 months are all summer months, it'll pull your price down. So the things you can do to play around with the cost of your budgets to get your budget under control. So that's the sort of things you can do. You don't have to write a 12, 24, 36 month contract. You can actually play around with how that works.
Can I just ask a question?
Of course.
Thank you. Just you mentioned about the carbon audit.
Yes.
With your energy assessment, does that cover any carbon footprint calculations, or is that something companies need to look into getting done separately?
Yeah, we can give you, as part of the audit process, there's a piece of kit that asks you 15 questions on your business, and it will give you an idea of what your carbon audit is. One of the biggest challenges for any business looking at a carbon audit is, what do you include and what don't you include? The easy bit to include is your own site. So you look at your site and say, scope 1, scope 2. Scope 1, as I said earlier, is the direct site. That's your gas, effectively, and your transportation. Scope 2 is indirect. That's your electricity. Scope 3 is the rest of the world. It's how you interact with your supply chain and your customer. So do you have people in the field? Do you have people driving cars around the UK? Do you go and collect your goods? Are the goods delivered? You've got to make a decision what you think you're going to audit first.
Yeah.
What sits in your world and what doesn't. I'll give you an extreme version of carbon footprinting, which we've been asked to by one of our clients. One of our clients is a professional, is a Premiership football club, and it wants to audit the whole its fan base going to each match, because they buy online. They know the postcode they're buying from. They want to look at what that would look like in a carbon footprint, taking a view that 30% go by train, 20% go by car, etc., etc. They're looking at it as an extreme because their view is that's what they want to do now. Because scope 1 and scope 2 is relatively straightforward. It's scope 3 is the challenge, and you've got to decide what you want in it. But yes, I can give you some tools to show you what that can do and how that would help you.
And can I just ask as well, with the energy assessment, is that like over a week, a period of time? Like, how does that work? Does someone visit?
Yeah. We would always put somebody on site, because the key with all of this is to understand how your site operates. So walking a site is really important, because that allows you to see things like, where does the sun set and rise? It allows you to look at working practices. So as an example, one of our clients said, look, can you come at midday? We've got a spike on our energy use on midday. We don't know why. So I had a walk around the site, and very simply, they were your cakes that you get from Costa and Cafe One and Cafe Nero all come from the same place. And they have fridges, and they were having lorries going on site with no plastic sheeting of any description, keeping the cold in. So at midday, they opened the doors, everything's ready to go out, and they were trying to freeze the planet. And that's where they were getting a spike. So just simple sort of a £50 plastic sheeting going around would actually save them a lot of money. So we have to look at how you operate. So it's important to get them really. Often it's quite good if you're shift working, where we get a change of shift. So the audit over that shift period is really useful, because it sees one group's finished, the next group's coming online. And you're looking at what's the handover look like, what does that look like, and how's that impact if you have a shift pattern in your business. So we'll always talk to you about when the most appropriate day is, and get an understanding. And then we cannot even put kit on site, and the kit would also give us an understanding of what you're using. And the kit is really simple. It's what they call portable CT clamps. They're no bigger than a matchbox. They clip over the cabling, and they read what actually is going through the cabling in terms of energy. So,
is that what you were talking about? Can go on the machines?
Yes, exactly the same thing. Yeah, you can clip it anywhere. You usually start with the distribution board and work out. So distribution board is the bit that sort of governs the site. You might have more than one, some big sites, and you clip the cabling around that, and then you say, well, actually, this is the area that's got the most. Then we'll go down and we'll go inside that particular phase of the distribution board and look at what that's powering on site, and then start bringing cabling inside that, which gives us an indication of them breaking down exactly what's actually happening. And again, we would leave it on for about a month or so to get a typical, this is a typical month for your business. That allows us to see what's going on site. And again, your energy broker should do the same. If you've got anybody involved in looking at your carbon footprinting or your consumption emissions, they should be doing this for you. We have most businesses will have we'll know what your energy consumption is, because you should have the data. If you've got a half-hour meter, you will have a data. You'll have data, and to a degree, crudely, you can get that data over the 48 periods in the day, and just literally do an Excel spreadsheet and show you what's being used in different parts of the day. It's but you can actually then drill down to something a bit more scientific and actually start breaking that up, so you get an understanding of what the site is doing.
Thank you very much.
how do I find, one of the questions I was asked here is, how do I find a supplier to offer a short-term contract, e.g. to the end of March? We're actually finding a lot of them are actually doing that already. I think the difficulty you've got at the moment is that if you're depending on your usage, if your usage is low, yeah, and yesterday I was talking to a shop owner who was a friend of mine, and they were looking at doing a 3-month contract from January, and British Gas were only offer 6 months, but their usage was very, very small. But in the business world, most of the people like EDF, SSE, and so on, the big groups will do a short-term contract, partly because the systems can't deal with a discounted scheme and a non-discounted scheme. So they're far happier writing it to the end of the period the government relief scheme finishes, having a different scheme afterwards, because they're having to do a manual adjustment, most of them, to actually do the rebate at this stage. Because if you think about it, when the government announced this, no energy company thought they were going to be a discount. They haven't got anything built into the systems to do this. This is a manual fix for most of the suppliers.
We're coming close to the end of the webinar, Steve. Can you offer an email address for direct inquiries to yourself?
Yes. On the last slide there, there's my information. So there's my email address, steve.bolt@bcrassociates.co.uk. And there's my mobile number, and there's my direct dial number, which will also be my mobile because I've directed it to my mobile all the time.
Thank you. So we look forward to hearing more from Steve in our Supply Chain Solutions magazine, which will be in March, and there'll be an online version with clickable items through to this webinar and other matters. Thanks very much, Steve.